Right now, the National Action Network is speaking. They just got out of a meeting with leaders at the Citadel Military College in downtown Charleston about pages in the school's yearbooks that they say are racist. This comes after similar controversies that you may have heard about in other parts of the country, specifically Democratic leaders in Virginia. We'll have more in just a moment.
Yeah, you are looking live right now at the Citadel. They're about to hold a news conference. We want to listen in right now to hear what they are saying about this meeting.
Johnson and a delegation of civic leaders from downtown. They presented to us some concerns about images in our yearbooks. We acknowledge that in the past we do have images that are offensive, and we're very transparent about those. We don't want to offend. We want to make sure that people understand that those images have nothing to do with what cadet life is all about now at the Citadel. We're a college that very much values and has daily conversations about honor, duty, and respect. And respect is something that's very important to our cadets. We talk about it on a daily basis, and we want to make sure that everyone understands that these types of images are not something that's tolerated today.
Elder Johnson seemed to get a better feel dealing with the Citadel now than past instances when he said that, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but he wasn't as happy. He wasn't as, I don't know what the right word is, but he wasn't as positive until today as far as walking away after a meeting with you all. Obviously there have been incidents in the past, especially a couple of years ago. Is there anything changed? Is there anything that you guys are working towards to make things even better?
Well, one of the things that's really important for an institution that's dedicated to the production of principled leaders is that you go directly to the problem when there's a problem. And when somebody wants to talk to us about an issue of concern, we're going to meet with them, we're going to discuss it, we're going to listen, and we're going to act. And that's what today's discussion was. General Walters has been very transparent about the college's history. That's something that we're going to continue. And we very much value Nan's advice with regard to increasing the number of cadets of color who come to the college. This is something that's a shared goal. And I think that's why you saw this as a very productive meeting today.
How can you do that? How can you increase the numbers? I think also Elder Johnson said something about every 4 different people on some sort of board or something. Don't remember exactly what he said.
Well, we've taken on a number of things that are intended to increase the number of cadets who are of color or minorities here. We offer scholarships. We actively recruit them to come here. This is something that we don't just hope they're going to come and hope that things get better. We have people that every day reach out into local schools and try to find people who are interested in the cadet experience that we have here. The Citadel is a challenging place. It's not for everyone, but this is something that if you want to make yourself a better person, if you want to learn leadership, we have a spot for you. So this is something that we actively recruit on. We also have a number of scholarships that are dedicated for students of color. And we also use our athletics program to make sure that we increase the diversity of the college. All these things are a comprehensive effort, but there's always room for improvement, and we welcome the advice of NAN and other organizations. We have Diversity Advisory Board here in the community that works closely with us on matters of race. We've actually briefed them on these images a number of months ago because we're transparent about this. We want people to understand what the college is all about today. It's very important to us.
Elder mentioned that you would consider keeping a couple of those images of people in blackface instead of trying to erase the history altogether, but using them as things that could help you teach cadets that this will not be tolerated here. So tell me a little bit more about that.
Well, it's a good example is General Walters today, or earlier this week actually, whenever this story broke in Virginia about the governor, he took that as an opportunity to send out a note to our campus community and make sure that people understood that such images have no place in public discourse in today's society, that the images of the past are something that we're going to have to explain. We won't shy away from them, but indeed we'll use images like these to make sure that conversations that need to happen do occur. It's something that, it's not something that will get any better if we shy away from it. The general is a leader. He's trying to teach all these young people who come here for this experience to be leaders too, and he set the example by sending out this letter to our campus community.
I guess unfortunately this might come up again just because of the history, and you can't go through everything at once. There could always possibly be racial literature somewhere, or some sort of symbol.
Well, the history of the college is something that we're not going to shy away from. We actually study it extensively. We have an archivist here at the college who's gone through a lot of the written materials. We actually study, along with many other universities across the South, the role of this institution and others in slavery. And this is something that it's not something that is something we're going to shy away from. We're going to be upfront about it, because in dealing with the past and having those conversations, that's how we all get better and more cognizant of, the way these things should be handled in the future.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
One more. This is a college that produces leaders. So is there going to be any way for your cadets to take place in this conversation, to maybe offer their ideas as to what can be done?
Well, these cadets are already a part of that conversation. They're a part of that conversation with their interactions in the local community. We have a leadership day where cadets go out into our local schools and share their thoughts about heroes, about leadership, about life, because what we want to do is have the cadets that work here through this cadet experience that's very challenging. We want them to share that experience with young people and what it means to be a leader, so that we can increase the amount of cadets that come here from our local community, including students of color, and just show them the way a leader handles that sort of thing. This is really important to us.
Anyone else? All right. Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, guys.
All right, you are listening in. You have been listening to officials at the Citadel who've met with the National Action Network about some things that have appeared in yearbooks in years past, pictures.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, the Citadel has a new president, Glenn Walters, and according to that official, that when that story broke in Virginia, the Citadel started immediately trying to address the issue of what may have appeared in the Citadel's yearbooks in years past. Photos and other things that might have been racist. The National Action Network addressing those issues with the Citadel. That official saying today that they will be forthright in terms of educating the community as well as educating Citadel cadets that that kind of behavior will not be tolerated. Certainly those images cannot be erased from the school's history, but they in fact will be forthcoming in terms of educating people about why this is destructive in terms of race relations and certainly in terms of community development. So we will hear more from Natalie. She is at that news conference live.
Yeah, being transparent more on the issues. We'll hear from both sides. We'll also hear from the National Action Network on what they had to say about that meeting, how effective it was, and the steps that they will take moving forward.
All right, more as we continue our broadcast.